Hey, you guys, my name is Aisha Malone. I am the owner and co-founder of Rose Cafe. To tell you guys just a little bit about Rose Cafe is a cafe that we want to bring to the Roseland community to cut the book desert by creating access to literacy to the community. So we had this idea that if we created a space in Roseland that we could have kids come in and talk to each other, provide mentorship, and we were going to do that through books.
My name's Rebecca Silverman. I'm the co-founder at Rose Cafe. And just really quickly, along with what Aisha said, we are an online bookshop right now. We don't have our physical space. We're working towards that. But we have been since 2020 giving out free books to the neighborhood, and we're really proud that we have given out 10,000 books so far because we really believe in the importance of literacy access, which we hope to talk about today. But we would love to introduce Maya. We thought her book, Reading for Our Lives, went perfectly with our mission, and everything is so aligned. So we're so excited to talk to you today. Maya, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and then we can get into our talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited to hear about the work that you're doing in Chicago. I'm just down the road in Milwaukee, and am always excited to support book lovers and getting books to the community. So congratulations on that milestone of distributing 10,000 books already in your local community. I came to this work as a parent who was just a book lover myself and wanted to pass that love of reading and literature on to my daughter when I had her. She's now 11, so it's been a while. And I knew a lot about books, but didn't know a lot about reading development, which I discovered is very different. So this was just sort of my initial curiosity into digging into how do children really learn to read, even before they can love it? How can they learn to make sense of all the text that they're encountering on the page? And so that led me into writing some blog posts, sharing information with parents that I met in my local community, and then eventually deciding to package it all up into a book to share more widely.
I know that before we begin our questions, you wanted to read a part of the book. So we will have this time to read it, and then after that, we'll start the questions.
Okay, fantastic. Yes, this is a section from the introduction of the book, and it's a section called My Journey. And it begins, on the night my dad died, I walked to his bedside to show him a black and white sonogram, glossy and blurred. It may have been the first time I ever approached him while he was lying down. In my memories, he was always up, reading the newspaper at the kitchen table, mowing the lawn or shoveling snow, laboring over files in his office, watching some dark TV drama. I remember the picture feeling light and flimsy in the enormity of the moment. A father on his deathbed, hearing his only child tell of the life she carried. He took in the sound waves rendered in print, smiled, and whispered, I think it's a boy, but I hope it's a girl. He got his wish, but I never got to ask him what he meant by it. He passed within hours of his quiet declaration and left me to puzzle over the spaces between a parent's dream and a child's promise, between presence and absence, between birth and legacy. When our baby girl was born months later, my husband and I named her after Zora Neale Hurston to foretell a wise, bold, and colorful life. Like my parents did when they named me after Maya Angelou, we set the intention of resilience, fortitude, and distinction upon her young shoulders. We vowed to help our Zora experience the fullness of her inheritance, to discover herself as powerful, unique, and inseparable from all the life that pulses everywhere, or as her namesake put it, to know that each of us is the world and the heavens boiled down to a drop. I made reading, the miracle of connecting with others across space and time, a pillar of my mothering. In our first days at home, the intimacy of sharing stories and books became a touchstone. I recited lines from Jabari Asim's Girl of Mine from dawn till dusk. Giggly wiggly, precious pearl, I'm so glad that you're my girl. That little board book held my dreams for my daughter. held my awe of her existence. Reading it over and over felt like love and life support for a sleep-deprived mom. Soon I'd memorized the text, turning the pages only for show as I kept on rocking, reading, feeding her. As a new mom who had just lost a parent, I was comforted by the story's easy rhythms and my own belief in the power of a parent's words in a child's ear. Knowing firsthand how words nourish, I wanted to feed her page upon page, give her tastes of poetry, let her sip prose. I felt the book's upbeat refrain bolster something precious and fragile in her and me. Reading to her was love, care, and a pathway to a family ethos that I treasured. Toni Morrison said, "We die. That may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives." Stories were our first language, were our first, most cherished language. I threw myself into the quest to raise a reader with all the zeal of new motherhood and the passion of someone who has lived the written word's power to both uplift and inspire. Soon, though, I was ready to expand my repertoire of literacy promoting activities. But what to add? The advice in the books on my shelf and in the articles I consumed voraciously seemed to start and stop with story time.
And so I just wanted to go back to what the poem you just read, not poem, well, the part where you said, Toni Morrison said, "We die. That may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives." Now, even to take that to the title, Reading for Our Lives, right? But then the first quote you started with was from Marian Wright Edelman. And it says, "The question is not whether we can afford to invest in every child. It is whether we can afford not to." So then I guess I want you to talk a little bit about the seriousness of reading. Like, are we using that analogy in a way, like if we're not teaching these skills, shorten life, you don't, and things of like as deep as that? So can you connect those quotes with the title and what you were meaning?
Absolutely. So thank you, first of all, for reading the book so carefully and connecting all of these dots. But when I chose,
when you said the Zora Neale Hurston, I'm like, well, hey, that's it too. Like, so that it was a repetition of it. And so I just knew it was important.
yes. So I picked the title Reading for Our Lives because I really wanted to highlight that urgency. I think for me, as someone who was an early reader, it came to me easily. I don't have any memories of learning to read. I just remember loving it. That I didn't realize until I was a parent how challenging it is for millions and millions of people to learn the basics of how to make sense of things they're reading in documents, let alone read well enough to enjoy literature or novel or longer passages in nonfiction books. So as I dug into it, I realized there were all these connections between literacy skills and even health outcomes. Literacy skills and likelihood of interactions with the police and the criminal justice system, and studies of incarcerated people that just show incredibly disproportionate numbers of people in jail who have low to no literacy skills. And so I was just seeing too many connections to reading to treat it lightly in this book, because I think we often think of reading challenges with adults, and we don't realize that the roots of those things start so early with things that are happening with babies and toddlers and preschoolers. And every 4 years or, periodically we get different statistics from different government agencies and reports that say, fourth graders aren't reading at a high enough level, eighth graders are struggling, and on, tens of millions of people between 16 and 64 are struggling. And so there are all these different statistics coming at us all the time. And what does it really mean to not be able to read? It means that you're not able to advocate for yourself effectively and vote effectively and do all kinds of things. So I wanted the title to capture that urgency, because I do think it's a life or death matter. It's about quality of life for sure. And then the subtitle, A Literacy Action Plan from Birth to Six, was to kind of bring people's attention earlier in the process. because there's so much coverage of challenges within our schools and problems with teacher training and curriculum and all of these things. And those are important and need to be dug into and addressed. But even before that, there's so much that parents and families and community members can do to get kids ready for school, which would help the outcomes that we're seeing when they're school aged as well.
When you talk about that urgency that you mentioned, it makes me think about the part in the book where you said, what I thought was personal ignorance was actually a national crisis. And when I read that, it like resonated with me so much because I'm not a parent. I've never had to teach my own child how to read, but as a former teacher, I taught first grade and I did not know how to teach them how to read. And I thought that it was like my own, that it was something that like I lacked. And when I was looking more into it, like how to learn, how to teach kids how to read, I came upon all these resources talking about how it is a national crisis where teachers are not taught how to teach kids how to read. And it's speaking to all those statistics that you had just mentioned, how it is a national crisis. And I'm wondering like how you think we can get people who might not know this or might not be around kids to understand like how important this is.
I think we have to kind of tie it to people's personal lives and the things that they care about most. So for business owners, who are you going to hire? Who are you going to employ? Who is going to have the money to buy the goods and services that you're trying to sell if we live in a society where so many people are cut off from a basic skill and the ability to read and take care of themselves? So I think if we can find ways to emphasize how all the issues that people have with crime or poverty or all these other things, if we can connect the dots for people between like education and early literacy and support for families and children, if we can connect those dots, I think that can help everyone have a greater sense of urgency about it. And you're right, so many teachers are not taught how to actually teach a child to read. So they're taught about children's literature, they're taught to do read alouds and group instruction, and they're kind of like pieces of it. But in terms of the sitting one-on-one and closing the gap for a child, especially bridging the gap between where you might expect a child to be in first grade and where they actually are, which has gotten worse since COVID. So I've talked to second grade teachers this year who are saying they're having kids coming into their classrooms that don't know any letters, don't know how to write their name, don't know how to hold a pencil. And people are astounded. And they're like, how can that be with a second grader? Well, they had virtual school for a couple of years and just certain things. And there are so many social, emotional, and other needs that schools have to attend to that sometimes reading, as important and fundamental as it is for everything else kids need to learn in school, sometimes reading's neglected. So I think we all have to, in our individual spheres of influence, just kind of take every opportunity to let people know this is a major problem and don't take it for granted that kids are being taught everything they need. And I think we also have to emphasize that families and parents have a role to play in all of those years before kids even get to kindergarten. So it's much easier for a teacher in a classroom if kids are arriving at a certain level with a certain base level of knowledge. But parents there's no program to qualify parents. And there's no, training that's consistent and ongoing for parents. The bar is like very low.
There's no accessible resources for the parents. You can even think about like Roseland in the community that we're trying to create literary access for. It's not easy for them to get. These are the people that you're talking about that you said have little to no literacy skills, can't do the order registration, that can't do the medical form, that does need help to do WIC applications and things like that. So then you have this book, but then it's like, what do we give them before the book? Because this is heavy. And I don't know how easy some people in this community could, if it starts at the parents, and Rosa have parents, how do they get these tools?
I think what I'm discovering now that I've had, when you're writing a book in isolation, especially in COVID, when you're not having as much interaction with people, you have this vision for how your book lands in the world and how it gets to the people who need it most. And what I've discovered is that, there's a particular kind of parent, there's a particular kind of reader, like both of you, who'll sit and read 240 pages on how to raise a reader. So I think the people who are able to read books like mine and get the concepts and just spreading it via word of mouth, not the book necessarily, but the
Yeah.
message that you are so important as your child's first teacher. And even if you're not a tremendous reader, there are so many things you can do to build their vocabulary through conversation. And most parents know some letters, teach the letters you know. So I think it's a lot, just a matter of librarians, educators, parent educators, like people in churches, wherever you're interacting with people with kids, kind of being their cheerleader and saying, you are so important for laying a strong groundwork for this child's education. And, here's one simple thing you can do that really does make a difference. I hope also that the audiobook makes the content more accessible to a lot of parents. So like people can listen to it in the car during a commute or, however people listen to things. And some of the things in the audiobook version are more easily understood. Like when I'm talking about letter sounds and things like that, I think hearing me talk through it in some cases communicates it better than people reading it themselves.
We mentioned earlier that, our mission around providing book access. And, we give out free books because we believe just in how important it can be for people to just have book ownership, just for kids to see books in the home, and for people to just literally to have them. And I was wondering how you thought that relates to the work that you do, and if you agree with that.
I do. I think it's really important to have books in the home and for kids to see their parents read, but I think it's important for parents to talk about the books as well. So have the book, don't just let it sit there and collect dust, read it to them, read it with them, say, this is the title and this is the author. And there's so many things that we forget that kids have to learn. They have to learn how you turn the pages or which way is right side up. They have to learn that the text runs from left to right or from the top to bottom of the page. So even just sometimes, and you don't have to do it every time you read, but just dragging your finger along the text, all of those things are kind of communicating to the child that the story is coming from the print on the page, not from the pictures. And so as parents and adults who are around children, we just have to kind of break it down a little bit to have the biggest impact. And then something about owning books. Also, libraries are wonderful. I'm a huge library advocate and I've begun doing some professional development to help librarians better support parents in picking books that are a good fit for their child, to help them build the skills they need to grow as readers. But there's something about having something that's your own that is really powerful for kids.
One of the things that, because I am a parent, and you did talk about like how connecting, nurturing strong oral language is proven for stress reducers for us. And I think like I want parents to hear that because we want it for the kids, but if it can help us in our lives and our longevity, can you speak to that aspect that you wrote about?
Yes, I came across one study. I thought that was a really interesting finding because I believe all parents want to do the best for their children, and we don't always have the support and resources that we need to do that. And so sometimes when we're focusing on what kids can get out of reading, we don't give a thought at all to what we're getting out of it. But there is a part of it when you're sitting and doing it together and talking about the book and you're both focused on the same thing, there's just that warmth and that bond that develops with the parent and the child, and you have these memories of all these shared stories. And in stressful times, like coming out of COVID, parents have a lot on their plates just getting through the day. And so to learn that like that time together can kind of settle the parent, ground you a little bit, and have some social, emotional, kind of mental health benefits for the parent, I think is positive and powerful.
and it makes sense. And it also, as far as like communicating, it's easier to understand, like when you start early, like you don't have to stress yourself out to understand what your kid's saying because they can speak well, they speak fluently. And it's easier a conversation exchange with me and my kids because I know I read to them early on. But as I'm a teacher as well, and I teach special ed. And so I do notice differences. And like my son could communicate really well. And it makes it easy for me in life to have that compared to when I'm at work and I'm trying to understand more, like understanding it could raise stress.
Absolutely. And that one of the things that emphasized in the book is with one of the things I was told was just talk all the time to your child and describe, if you're walking through the park, describe the trees and the grass. If you're in the grocery store, talk about the colors of the fruit and all the different things. But what I learned through the research was the importance of it being a back and forth exchange. So pausing for the child to respond, even if you can't understand them. So that was something I learned that I didn't know. Because a lot of people think, oh, why would you talk to this baby? They can't talk back. But they're getting practice, they're getting reps and communication. And then you're getting the power really in the brain building and development for them is when they're trying to communicate and respond to what you said. So that is something for parents to remember, just to keep it a dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
Aisha mentioned students with like diverse learner students. And to that point, I really like that you included milestones in the book. Because I do think that parents, maybe if it's their first child, they don't know like where their child should be at each level because they don't have really a comparison. So I think that's like really helpful for them to see, what the average student is at. But, for diverse learning students with special needs, where they're not at these milestones, what do you recommend for parents?
I think parents should be aware of them just for their own knowledge. And then it also sort of sharpens their observations of what they are seeing and hearing with their child. So I encourage parents to do journaling and take notes, because when you feel like the parent often is the first person to recognize that there's an issue. They may not know the technical term for it, but they feel like something isn't right or the child isn't where they think that they should be. And so I think it's important for parents to honor sort of what they're feeling about where their child is and have some knowledge of the CDC developmental milestones and those things, so that when they go to well child visits with their pediatrician, they can raise questions, or when they interact with formal school settings. There's so many resources that parents can be connected to even prior to school for speech issues and all kinds of things, if they know to kind of look out for them and they know to ask for help and support. So I think the earlier intervention is better for everything. So I don't advocate taking a wait and see approach. A lot of people say, oh, it just takes some kids longer. You don't have to stress about it, but I think you should observe it and ask questions and start to get a feel for what resources are available in your community and what specialists you might be able to get referrals to, talking to other parents, because we need so much help.
And that's why we're going to stress about it. And that's why, like, and even when you compare the milestones and you be like, oh, well, my baby's not doing this, he's not babbling right or saying like that, that does create the stress level. And it makes me also think about the title, like that's probably what we need, that guide to make us think like, okay, get up and go get your child looked at to see like if there is something going on, to be proactive, because we are going to stress about it regardless as parents and teachers.
Yes. And I encourage parents to listen when I've heard like so many situations where a teacher, because think about it, teachers have classrooms full of kids who are about the same age and they see them year after year. So they have a feel for where kids typically are and when there are challenges. And some parents just don't want to hear it when a teacher says this child has a challenge that I'm unable to meet in my classroom. And so parents have to be receptive as well, because teachers can be great resources.
So I know we're coming close to the 30. I was thinking about a couple of terms. The first one was the sleeper effect. When you wrote about that, as far as the reading development as a sleeper effect and how we should always watch everything that they're doing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So remind me, was that in the context talking about oral language and how sometimes you're building skills and you don't see the impact of it
Yeah.
for years later? So I think for one big picture thing for people to think about when they're thinking about their child and what it takes for them to become a great reader, there's kind of two big components. So one is decoding, and that's the part that a lot of people lock in on. So learning your letters and learning sounds and connecting the letters to sounds. And then the other piece of reading is oral language. So having a big vocabulary, knowing a lot of words and what they mean. And you can't become a great reader without both pieces. And you're going to sort of emphasize different things at different times. So I think parents should always be thinking about words and vocabulary from day one. So talking to your baby, treating those coos and babbles as if they're words that you understand and responding. Because in the beginning, you're teaching them names, you're teaching them, this is a table, this is a chair, and all that kind of basic vocabulary to kind of name and understand the world. And then over time, the vocabulary gets more complicated as they get more exposure to the world. And then through books, you introduce just a whole other range of vocabulary. And so they need to have heard words and understood them in conversation in order to have any shot at making sense of them in print when they first start reading. So I believe in that section of the book, I was just talking about build oral vocabulary, talk to them, read with them. And then there's the period of time when you're focused on letters and print and decoding, and then they're really going to take off. A lot of children will learn to decode, but they struggle with reading comprehension because they just don't have the background knowledge and vocabulary to make sense of the more advanced text that they're going to encounter in upper elementary school and middle school.
And that's just as easy as exposure, because I know you talk about levels for parents, and one of them was connecting. And so if I can't give it to you as a parent, I the dentist can give you language that I don't have, and that get your kid outside, get them to nice restaurants, even because I always wanted to use it for tools that can help the people that we are serving, or the parents that I'm serving, that I'm running in contact. Because I can't give them this book, but I can give them these tools, make sure you're getting out with your kids and make sure they're talking to their dentists, having that language exchange with those other professionals, even if you're not saying anything.
Absolutely. And then museums, children's museums, libraries have great programming, and we sometimes think it has to be expensive. It's not. It's just being aware on our part to describe. There's so much language just even walking through your neighborhood, signage, talking about the menus. Even if you don't go in and eat, you can look at the menus in different restaurants and talk about the words and all those things. And even with older kids, media, you can watch documentaries, and there's so much science and social studies content to be learned even through videos. And so if you watch those together and talk about them, that also is building their vocabulary and background knowledge.
I think that a lot of parents, the one thing they know to do that they should be doing is reading before bed. But I think there are and you mentioned this, a lot of misconceptions about the importance of it. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about what is reading out loud before bed? What does it do and what does it not do?
So part of how I came to that is I'm a sleepyhead. So it's never good at reading to my daughter every night. And I felt bad about it. My husband did it much more consistently than I did. And a lot of people, some people work the night shift, or, they have some kind of conflict, or maybe they aren't the best readers themselves. So I think it's important to understand what that does give kids, what it doesn't, and what else they might need. So reading is wonderful if you can establish that habit, and it could be reading in the morning over breakfast, reading. So it doesn't have to be bedtime. But the big thing that you're giving them, again, is just that awareness of print. If you're pointing out things, they're learning the directionality of the text. They're learning vocabulary about books, like author and title. And then they're getting all of the content of the stories. Or if you're reading nonfiction, they're getting background knowledge again about the world. And if you pause after you read the story and ask questions and give them a chance to, summarize the story or say what they would have done differently or ask any questions they have or imagine what a next chapter of the book might be. If you create conversation around that book, you're doing major, really critically important work on that oral language piece. And then when they're 3 or 4 and they're starting to pay attention to print, you can, and you don't even need a book for this. It could be a cereal box. It could be a piece of paper and you write a letter. So I always I want to highlight that most kids are not getting a lot of knowledge about letters from you reading a storybook. They're looking at the pictures. But again, if you do little things like dragging your finger across the text as you're reading, they'll start to make that connection that, this is where you're reading now. But if you pause and talk about letters and tell them, all letters are made of line, dots, and curves. Here's an R, it has this long line and then this curve and a little short line, and get in the habit of kind of bringing their attention to print. There's only 26 letters. I feel like parents can definitely teach them over time if they know that it's important. I think most parents would.
And you say that a lot, like if the parent knows it's important, like if the parent wants to do that, like you put a lot of responsibility on the parents. And I love that because I do too as a teacher, like, hey, are you helping me at home? And because you have to have that responsibility to move forward and I like that you said it's urgent, and I like that you have this data, because we can't just give it to the parents like, well, this is what the data says. It's not made up. The data says you have to communicate better with the child to help develop oral language and things like that. And so then I was curious as far as curriculum development. And I know you had said that, do you do that? Because I know with the line curve, little line, I learned something just as quick with that, Is that something that you're trying to give to teachers besides just, hey, we all have teacher books because this is a teacher book, but does it become with like a plan to implement in the classroom in like small group or something like that, digital toolbox or something for a teacher?
No, I haven't thought about, what I have thought about for teachers is more materials that they can give parents to work on these things, because I really feel like it takes all of us. So I'm trying to like firmly stay in the parent space. There are a lot of people.
I love that.
There are a lot of people doing a lot of reading curriculum. And so I think that is developing. And I think over time, we'll have better curriculum for in the classroom. It's a whole another ballgame, as you know, to try to teach 20, 30 kids as opposed to teaching one. So some of the things that I just think it's easier for parents to do it a little bit at a time before kids get to school than for a teacher to try to do it with 30 kids who are at all different levels. So I think for like my personal mission is very much focused on parents.
I appreciate you saying that, Miss Smart. I appreciate you saying that.
I have such respect for teachers. I think that in the media, there's a lot of, piling on teachers. Teachers aren't doing this, schools are failing, blah, blah, blah. But I think it really is, it's a total community responsibility. It's just mission impossible, especially coming out of COVID, for teachers to get all of the kids in their classroom reading on grade level. Like I'm in a community where only 1 out of 10 Black students is reading like proficiently. So like as a parent, those are terrible odds. Like if you're relying on school to get a school alone to get your child prepared, it's not. Most people, it's just the numbers don't indicate that you should have faith in that system or process. So I think the other thing I like, even if parents don't do all of these things, I think having greater awareness of what all goes into reading will help them appreciate what the teacher is doing even more. If they try to teach their child and can't teach the thing, then they get a little taste of what that teacher is doing times 30.
Times 30. And that's what we want to create.
Teachers aren't just teaching reading. Teachers are doing math and science and the social emotional.
Emotional, it's a lot, it's heavy. But that's why we want to have this space in Roseland. Like this is one of the reasons why we wanted to create Rose Cafe, because in addition to the parent, in addition to the school, you have this hub, this reading hub, where the modeling is being done, like where you can come in and you can see people having high level conversations. You can see professional women, you can hear the language. And it's just in addition to, because and they're happening now. It's not happening in the school. It has to be a place where like it's happening. And that's why we're eager to open up this place and like create this foundation that helps us. And that's why we do what we do.
It's wonderful. I'm so excited to learn about your mission and the work that you're doing in the community to get books to kids. And there's just something powerful about those conversations that are sparked around books. And like, it makes a difference for a child to grow up in a community where books are valued.
Yes.
And they see it as a gathering spot. And it just brings a whole other dimension to community.
And we'll be on the lookout for the action plan for children beyond 6. Is that going to come out next or?
It's a good question. Now, part of what I'm interested in is I have a middle schooler. So I definitely am interested in this question of like what keeps kids
Right.
interested and gets them to the next level. And so for when your store opens, author visits will be huge. Jason Reynolds came to her school, and he was such a dynamic, wonderful communicator. And then the book that they featured was so good. She immediately read like 3 more of his books. I think that personal connection to books and author experiences is kind of magical too.
I love that. So I guess we want to wrap up with respect of people's time, but we did want to talk a little bit about some upcoming events that Rose Cafe have coming up. One which is a fundraiser in February. Are we talking about the fundraiser? So we are becoming a not-for-profit, and we are looking for support in this mission. And to introduce this new endeavor that we have, we are going to throw a fundraiser to talk a little bit about our mission, show people what we've been doing, and to get people on our team to help us grow as a foundation.
We're really looking forward to it. The information on it is on our website for people listening, rosecafe.org. And then also another thing we have coming up, this was our book club book for this month. We pick a book each month and highlight an author. And the book that we'll be reading next month is called, for anybody that's interested, is called Everywhere You Don't Belong, and it's set in Chicago. And we're excited about that. We considered Milwaukee local. It's Midwest, so but we really love to highlight local minority authors, and we really love this book. And we were just talking before about how we're so excited to give it to parents and talk about the knowledge that we've gained with parents. So we really look forward to that too.
Thank you so much for featuring me as a part of your book club. I'm so excited to be a small part of what you're doing to bring ideas to and information, helpful resources to your community. And if anyone wants to stay in touch, my website is mayasmart, MAYASMART.com. And each week I publish free family resources. So read with me recipes and book lists and alphabet scavenger hunts and just different things. So mayasmart.com.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Maya. We do post this on our Instagram and on our YouTube channel, and we will be in touch.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.